Hello everybody out there, welcome to the newest edition of Medfield People. My guest today is my friend Jean Hubbard, who I met by accident at the center. She introduced herself to me. We played bridge that day and we won, if you remember.
Yes.
First time we ever played. And she introduced herself to me and said her name was Old Mother Hubbard, so I still think of that all the time. Jean lives here in Medfield now, but she's a fairly new resident and she's had an unbelievable life experience. So I'd like her to be able to tell people at home so you can hear what a great and crazy life this normal-looking woman has had. So Jean, tell us all about, how'd you come to Medfield?
I came to Medfield from Florida, and I'm living with my daughter right now. And I'm enjoying the COA at Medfield immensely. Found many friends.
I bet you have.
But
and you play a good game of bridge, too.
Thank you very much. I played bridge in many places.
No, could you, that's why one of the reasons I wanted to have you here was to tell all the different places you have lived.
I wish I could remember them all.
You grew up where?
I grew up in Kansas City and in Europe, and I've lived in Hawaii for a couple of years. I lived in Paris for a couple of years. I lived in Milan, Italy for 15
years.
And I've lived in New Jersey, New Mexico. New Mexico was interesting. I worked for the atomic bomb project. And while I was there, I worked in a secretarial position. And my boss often entertained Ed Teller, who was what we call the father of the atomic bomb.
I remember the name.
He mentioned they were going to have a shot in Nevada. And I wanted desperately to go. And I had just had I just had a baby, two months old, and I called my mother, could she come and go with us, and we'd all go to Nevada to see the shot. And then I found out I had to take a lot of introduction to get invited in this thing, and they insisted that you have to have a reason to go. And my boss was colorblind, and I could see colors perfectly. So I sold myself as a person who could demonstrate what color was going off in the atomic cloud, and that would be a contribution. And then I ran into the obstacle that you had to be a male to attend.
This is my favorite part of the story.
And so I rather gave it up, but then I thought, no, I can't give it up. My husband's going, I'm going. And so I got the Army to issue me a pair of fatigues and a mask and goggles. And we went from the hotel by a devious cab ride to a darkened building. And we were questioned at the door who we were, and we had to give the identifications properly. And I did get inside, but I forgot to tell you that I had to change my name.
To what?
From Genevieve to Jean, G-E-N-E, the first four letters of Genevieve, in order to pass for a male, because you had to get approved by a Washington office. And they saw only the G-E-N-E, Hubbard, and assumed that I was a man, and away I went. No fingernail polish, no rings, no earrings, no nothing.
What'd you do about your voice?
I kept quiet.
You kept quiet?
For a change, I didn't say anything.
That'd be like me keeping quiet. That'd be like a miracle.
We drank tea all the way there to keep warm. First of all, I forgot to tell you that we had to lay down in the bus after we got into the bus. They loaded us out of this darkened warehouse into school buses, and we laid on the floor of the bus until it went out of the town, and then the driver announced we were out safely on the highway and we could get up. And this was to sort of fool the newspapers so that they wouldn't follow us out and there wouldn't be a lot of hurrah and trouble with the shots.
What year was all this, roughly?
You can't ask me because I can't remember. But we did see, I did experience a tower shot, and also one dropped from an airplane. And I must say the one from the airplane was the scariest because I kept thinking as I stood on that piece of desert with a bit of snow on the ground and these heavy boots and what have you, I hope that pilot was accurate because we were within a 5-mile radius of the bomb drop.
Oh.
And we did get knocked down by the sound waves and got up from the ground, and I was able to record the colors of the cloud. But that's the,
Jeepers. Can't
that's
imagine
one
that.
story.
And you must have been scared out of your mind.
But I still am in touch with the Washington office that keeps track of your health for everybody who was in those field, as they call them, field shots.
Mm-hmm.
And from Los Alamos, my husband came home at dinner time one night and announced, oh, by the way, he said, we're going to move to tomorrow. The movers are going to be here at 9 a.m. That was my movement to Washington, D.C. And my parents arranged for me to have a patroness in Washington, D.C. who arranged my social life, and my husband was a telecommunication advisor to Truman and Eisenhower, and as a consequence, he had a social life all planned for him.
I bet he did.
He was also chief of communications for the atomic energy, so he had a lot of invitations that he had to accept. And after about 5 years, I nagged my husband into leaving the gay life in Washington and getting a sandwich bag and a 9-to-5 job. And he went with RCA International. And about 2 months after he went with RCA International, they sent him to Paris. And after he got to Paris, I said to his supervisor, how long does a man stay in Paris before his family can follow him? And he said, well, you can go right now. I took 4 children out of school, sold the house, and set the furniture off to be packed and took off for Europe right away.
Jeepers.
We ended up in Hotel Crillon at the end of the Champs-Élysées, and we lived there for about a year with 4 children who found the tunnel between the Hotel Crillon and the American Embassy very handy because they could slip through this tunnel over to the American Embassy and get a hamburger. And that's what they lived for.
And nobody knew they were going to use that tunnel.
No.
Wow.
And their parents managed to stay upstairs and eat pea soup, which is the favorite in the hotel at Paris. And while I wandered around in the hotel, I saw a brass plaque on the wall, and I was very interested in reading what it said. It said it was welcoming a visitor from the United States and it was commemorated by Lafayette. And the visitor was Benjamin Franklin.
Wow.
He had stayed at this hotel.
I remember him being in Paris,
Yes.
hearing about it.
And so after we went to Paris, we lived in Hawaii, and my
So you went directly from Paris after a couple of years, right?
Yes,
Then to Hawaii?
to Hawaii for a couple of years. And my husband's mission at that time was to find a picture of the other side of the moon. And at that time, they hadn't gotten a man on the moon. And of course, the moon was still just a luminary for all of us to admire on the moonlight nights. But he was interested in finding out what was on the other side of the moon. And he did put out the message from his station, Goodwill, Peace on Earth to Men, from President Eisenhower when he spoke about the actual picture being accomplished. And after that was accomplished, my husband wasn't interested in that job. He wanted something else that was challenging. And I had been commissioned by a millionaire to take his wife and 2 daughters on a cultural tour of Europe for 3 months. And I took my 2 daughters along with me, and we traveled for 3 months, seeing all the sights in Europe.
That'd be amazing to do.
And
At somebody
came
else's
back,
expense, too.
right? And
That's what's the best part
didn't
would
have
be.
to think about that.
Yeah.
And then came back to Italy, and sitting on the beach, I sat next to an Italian lady who kind of complained her husband had all this money, and he was looking for a man who had ideas. And I said, my husband has ideas. We got together, the husbands got together, and a company was formed, and my husband became president of the company, and we lived in Italy for 15 years and traveled around. As a matter of fact, the 2 girls were educated in school there. One of them went to school in Italy for 13 years, so quite something. And then we came back to the United States because the older girl was ready to go into college, and besides that, she was falling in love with a Frenchman, and the second daughter was falling in love with someone from Yugoslavia. And I could see my grandchildren all scattered all over
Yes, you
Europe.
could.
So I decided it's time to get
Go
them
home.
back to the States. So we brought them back to the States.
How many languages do your kids speak?
My daughter is quite proficient in French and in Italian. As a matter of fact, when I brought her back, took her out to Amherst to put her into school, into college, and the dean said, I'm sorry, but your daughter speaks Italian and has achieved 800 on the test, and that's about the highest score they've ever had. Then in her French was about 800, a nice score, but her English is only 300. So I don't think she'll do well at Amherst. And so I said, well, I've taught school a number of years, so I think maybe she'll
learn.
catch on in a hurry. And he gave her a term, and she passed the term, and she passed the second year, and was doing very well. So he continued each year to correct and let her go. And she graduated cum laude, so I guess she caught on to English
I guess she
too.
did.
But
Weren't the kids upset about moving? I mean, my kids didn't even want to move from Philadelphia to New Jersey, let alone from Washington, D.C. to Paris to every place else you've been. Weren't the kids upset about? No.
No, they were never upset. They always looked at it as a new challenge.
Jeez.
They were going to meet new friends. They were going to learn new things.
And they did.
And yes, they learned a lot of things. As a matter of fact, when we first moved to France, the children played on the street with the French children, and they played a game called Cash Cash. And I decided I better watch to see what Cash Cash was. And it turned out to be our old game of hide and seek. So
Oh, C-A-C-H-E.
Yes.
That's how, okay, I
So,
was spelling it C-A-S-H.
Yes. So they had a lot of experiences too, and met a lot of friends.
Oh, I bet they did.
And I just have lost a friend in Switzerland that I've had for over 75 years. So it's been a full life. It's been a really full life.
That's an understatement, my friend. It's been fuller than almost anybody else's life that I have ever heard of. That's why I wanted to get you here.
I get started rattling and I don't stop. I'm sorry.
No, you're not. You're not running on. No, their stories are absolutely great, and it's amazing to me that your children could accept all those moves. because so many kids, back when we were married in the 50s and into the 60s and 70s, people were transferred a lot. And we lived in a Levittown at one point, and you know, your neighbor would change one year, and then there'd be somebody else behind you the next year, and everybody was being transferred all over the place. So, and my kids didn't like it, but that was small transfers. You're talking major moves.
Well, and in addition to changing schools and changing friends, we traveled a lot. When we had spare time, we traveled all over Europe, camped in days when camping was popular and safe then. And the same way with Hawaii, we spent our time running around the island, experiencing different things. I did Girl Scouting, and
You were a Girl Scout leader?
yes, I was a Girl Scout
I was too.
leader.
I didn't know that.
I taught school in Hawaii, and one morning I woke up, I looked at the ceiling, and the ceiling was all pink. And I had just been, about 2 weeks prior, I had been on a tour of the volcano and walked through the cauldron of it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I walked through, I felt like I wanted to sit down for a few minutes, had on white slacks, and so I decided to put a piece of newspaper down first and then sit on the paper. And I did. I didn't get my slacks dirty, but the newspaper turned brown from the heat of the volcano.
Wow.
We walked on through. We were led by one of the people from the national park. They assumed it was a safe time to go. They keep track of the volcano by seismic gauges, which measure the raising of the earth around the volcano, and they can tell approximately when it might erupt.
Okay.
So they felt it was secure and safe for us. And we walked out of there. It was about a mile to walk up and out. And then 2 weeks later, I look at my ceiling at nighttime, and it's rosy red, and I look, and there's fire coming out of the volcano. Our house was situated on a cliff over the ocean, and the cliff was composed of a hollow tube that had been made by the lava formerly, where it had flowed out and fallen into the ocean. So it echoed sounds. So we had echoing sounds from the volcano, which are like small earthquakes. And on one weekend, we had 1,100 earthquakes. They weren't all ones that we felt, but
That's scary.
they took it. They measured it, at least in the national parks place, and so we knew that these had occurred. It was interesting, and
Interesting.
and I kept thinking there was kind of a hill behind us that was made of nothing but pebbles that had been formed by the volcano. And I kept thinking, anytime one of those earthquakes is going to upset that hill, and the whole hill is going to devour us. But it never did.
I wonder if the hill's still there today.
I expect it is. Hawaii was an eerie place for me to live. One night I awakened and I heard a woman crying. She cried pitifully and loudly, and I would swear she was in the next room. And I got up and awakened everybody in the house, and we all listened and tried to discern what it was. And shortly after we heard the crying, a storm took place, and a storm was coming in, and that was the sound made over the volcano and the lava. We live close to what you call lava, which is very rough and pointed and jagged. And it must have been the wind blowing through that configuration that
And it
caused
really sounded like a human crying.
it actually sounded like a woman crying. Well, we thought that was amazing. And then I took my Girl Scouts on a foray, and we went down to the southern tip and found a cave and walked down into this cave. It was actually a puka, a hole made on the surface of the ground that led down into one of these tubes that I spoke about that the volcano empties out. And we found skulls and body parts. They had used
and you had
it.
young children with you?
They had used it for burial grounds, and we picked up the children, and I picked up parts of poi pounders and fish line poi pieces, basalt adze, and all sorts of ancient instruments, and I donated them to the museum in Hilo because they were quite old and quite treasured, I guess.
I would think so. That's amazing.
Yep.
That's absolutely amazing. Out of all the places you live, now can you tell me truthfully, is Medfield the very finest?
It's
I'm putting you on the spot.
I think it's my final stop, if that's what you mean, because I've been able to collect all these stories and all these experiences because I've lived so long. I lived a lot longer than I expected to live. I set my goal for 75.
And you
Then
made
I'm
that.
going to wait till I'm 85, and then I'm going to give away all my money, all my jewelry, everything I own. Then I waited till, now I'm waiting till 95, which is next year.
So you're 94 now?
94.
I bet the
still
people at
going.
home don't believe that you're that old.
Still going.
Wow, you are still, I hope you're still going, kiddo, in another 10 years. I
Well,
would hope so.
I don't know how long I'm going to last, but I've had a full life, an enjoyable life, an interesting life, and I've just touched on a few stories. I could keep on talking for another couple of hours
Well,
if you had the hours to spend.
Sometimes people, well, I interviewed a group of people that were descendant of Italian settlers, people that invade, I called it the Italian invasion of Medfield. And they talked about it, and we've had several people call and ask me to do step number 2. They would like to have the Italians back. So let's see if anybody calls and says, let's get Jean Hubbard back. We'll find out. Because you must have some other stories. I'm sure you do.
Yes, I do.
But thank you so much, my friend, for coming. I really appreciate it, Jean.
I hope it hasn't been just a monologue, because you're an interesting person too.
Next
I've
to you, I am
enjoyed
dull, but your life is extraordinary. I really appreciate it. I hope people at home will get the chance to meet Jean and enjoy her daughter Carolyn and her grandchildren. But thanks again, Jean, for being with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Been a
Medfield
pleasure.
People says goodbye, and we will do another interview in a few weeks, and we'll see who else we can find. But I don't think we'll find many people with his life as exciting as Jean has had. Thanks again.
I'm Roberta Lynch, and you're watching Medfield.tv.